If I were an in-universe Pokemon trainer, I would 100% be a bug catcher. I love bug types. So any chance I get to talk about bug Pokemon within the TCG, I take it because they are few and far between. Today we're talking about one of my favorites, Ninjask. This is the Ninjask from EX Dragon. It has this loose shell Poke Power. Once during your turn when you play Ninjask from your hand to evolve your Nincada, you may search your deck for a Shedinja and put it onto your bench. Treat the new bench Pokemon as a basic Pokemon. And wowee, Shuckle, this would be great with Wigglytuff. You know that Wigglytuff deck that we just talked about? A Poke Power that accelerates Pokemon onto the bench just by evolving? An attack that uses colorless energy? Free retreat too? This is perfect for a Wigglytuff deck. But that ain't what we're doing with it. No, that's too easy. Instead, we're doing something way dumber. We're not even including Shedinja in this deck. This is an updated version of Fossil Stall. You know, the archetype that forces your opponent to attack and knock out a bunch of Pokemon that aren't technically Pokemon so they don't get any prizes for it, thus wasting their attacks, whittling down their deck, and leading you to a win con of Deck Out. Except this version does have an alternative win con by knockout, so it's not as boring as it sounds. You're probably not going to believe me until you see the actual deck list. Let's go ahead and jump to that. The Pokemon count over here says 11, but these 12 bubbies over here, all these fossils, these are gonna be technically Pokemon. But first, let's start with Nincada from EX Dragon. Nothing too much to talk about here. It's 50 HP. You're not going to be attacking with it very much. The center of the deck is going to be Ninjask. Ninjask has 70 HP. It has this loose shell Pokemon power that we're just going to ignore because there's no Shedinja in this deck, so the loose shell does nothing. What we're going to focus on is this Quick Touch attack, which is dealing 30 damage for 2 colorless. In this format, that's pretty solid for 2 energy, honestly. And you may switch Ninjask with one of your bench Pokemon. If you do, you may remove any number of grass energy attached to Ninjask, move it to the new active Pokemon. One of the great things here with Quick Touch is it's not a requirement on either account, so you may switch Ninjask with one of your bench Pokemon. And if you do, you may move any number of grass energy cards attached to Ninjask, and it does not specify it has to be basic grass energy. It can be any energy that provides grass energy. So essentially what you're doing here is Baby Porter, or the Donphan deck that we've talked about on the channel. It seems like every format has one of these hit and run decks where it's just deal damage, go to the bench, stick something in the active that can sponge damage, or just get knocked out to no consequence, which is exactly what we're doing here. This is a Fossil Stall deck after all, so you're going to use Ninjask's Quick Touch to repeatedly deal 30 damage, flip back to the bench, and move one of these fossils into the active position. So we'll go ahead and look at these fossils. Claw Fossil, it's got 40 HP. It's not like Mysterious Fossil back in the day, so this thing can actually tank a couple of hits for you. And it's got this Pokebody, Jagged Stone, so that anytime it's damaged by an opponent's attack, you put 1 damage counter on the attacking Pokemon. So not only are you tanking a couple of hits, you're also placing damage counters on your opponent's active Pokemon. When they knock this thing out, they don't get a prize. Root Fossil isn't as useful, but it also has 40 HP, so it can take at least 1 hit. It has the Pokebody Spongy Stone. At any time between turns, remove 1 damage counter from Root Fossil. So your opponent's first attack going to be dealing 10 or 20 damage. In between turns, you can heal that off, meaning that next turn, they're still not going to be able to knock you out unless they're attaching more energy, attacking again. You can already see that you are forcing your opponent to waste turns attaching energy to their Pokemon to attack into your Pokemon and get nothing for it. And then finally, we do have Mysterious Fossil here, which does have 10 HP, so it's only going to be taking 1 hit. It can come in handy if your opponent is stuck just using status attacks. Mysterious Fossil can be evolved up into the 1 copy of Aerodactyl EX we have in here. This is Aerodactyl from Sandstorm. It has this Pokebody Primal Lock. As long as Aerodactyl EX is in play, your opponent can't play Pokemon tool cards. It doesn't have to be in the active position, it just has to be in play, so this Aerodactyl can sit on the bench and just stop your opponent from playing tool cards. There are quite a few tool cards used in this format. Well, there's only a few tool cards that are getting used, but quite a few decks that actually utilize them. Among those are Strength Charm and Crystal Shard. These are tool cards that are going to pop up in a lot of decks, and so if they are a part of your opponent's strategy and you can shut those down just by evolving one of these useless fossils up into an Aerodactyl EX, go for it. And with this deck, it's not going to be too hard to draw up into an Aerodactyl EX when you need it, unless it is trapped in your prize cards. Now lastly here, we're going to be talking about Rayquaza EX, which is going to be your alternative win con. You can't always win by just stalling your opponent out, because they could potentially get a nice setup. They could knock out all 12 of your fossils, and you're not going to be able to get a lot of knockouts on them by just dealing 30 damage over and over again. Rayquaza is going to be your setup Pokemon to where once your Ninjask has the 2 colorless on it and you're just swinging 30 over and over again, you still have energy per turn that you can be attaching to Rayquaza EX. And when the time is right, you're just going to Ninjask straight into that Rayquaza. You're going to deal a ton of damage. Rayquaza has this massive attack, Dragon Burst, that requires fire energy and lightning energy. Whenever you use this attack, you either discard all the fire energy attached to Rayquaza EX or all the lightning energy attached to Rayquaza EX, and this attack does 40 damage times the amount of whichever energy you discarded. One of the things that you can do is take a multi-energy that is attached to a Ninjask and is providing grass energy, and just have that transferred right on over to a Rayquaza, which will then go from providing grass energy for that Ninjask to providing either a fire energy or a lightning energy to a Rayquaza EX, powering up this Dragon Burst attack and allowing you to get some key KOs whenever necessary. Aside from our staple fossil cards in the trainer list here, we have some other key cards to look at. The first being Copycat. This is going to be your standard draw power. 2 copies in here just because it is so dependent on your opponent's own ability to draw and keep cards in hand. In addition to that, we got a full playset of TV Reporter, probably the best draw power you have in the 2004 format. You're just going to be able to draw cards, discard one of them, and most of the time you're going to discard an energy. We have plenty of ways to get that back unless it's absolutely necessary for that turn. But TV Reporter is going to be your early game draw. Bill's Maintenance isn't bad. It's another situational one, which is why there's only 2 copies of Bill's Maintenance and Professor Birch from Ruby and Sapphire. Now that's going to be your draw power, pretty heavy on draw just to get that early setup. You also have a couple of key search tools, the first being Dual Ball, which is going to let you search out basic Pokemon, your Ninkatas, your Rayquazas. Dual Ball is actually a bit overpowered in this format just because it does allow you to search out basic EX Pokemon. This was printed before EX Pokemon existed, so it doesn't have that caveat of you can't look for them. In addition to that, we got Fastball, which is the fastest way to get evolution cards out of your deck. There's only 5 evolution Pokemon in this deck, so you're gonna hit either a Ninjask or an Aerodactyl. Most of the time, you're really looking to hit that Ninjask, so if you do hit the Aerodactyl, that's gonna be a miss early game, but the odds are you're gonna hit the Ninjask and get exactly what you need very quickly early game. Now, aside from your search and draw, we also have Fisherman. Fisherman is gonna be your primary way to recycle those fire energy and lightning energy, so that you're not going to run out of them. There's only 6 each over here in the energy list, so you need a way to recycle those. Fisherman's going to be the best way to do it, and they don't even get shuffled back into your deck. You get to choose 4 basic energy cards in your discard and put them back in your hand. Most decks would only run 1 copy of this, just because Rayquaza EX is your finisher. You're not really going to need to recycle the fire and lightning all that much. But I have played plenty of games with this deck online where the Fisherman is in the prize cards, and once I attack with Rayquaza EX, I'm just sitting there and I can't do a whole lot else other than swap into Ninjask and deal 30 damage at a time. Your other recycler is going to be Town Volunteers, which is going to let you recycle not only the basic energy cards, but also basic and evolution Pokemon. The stadium for the deck is going to be Mirage Stadium, which makes it a lot harder for your opponents to retreat. And when you are running a stall deck, that is going to be key because you're buying yourself turns every time your opponent is wanting to swap into a new attacker that's on the bench. that can completely steamroll your deck. This is going to stop them from doing that. And to assist with the Mirage Stadium shenanigans, we also have 3 copies of Warp Point in here. Warp Point is a dirty card to run with Mirage Stadium because your opponent has to swap in their Pokemon first, so you get to see what their choice is. So this is going to inform your decision as to whether or not you're throwing a fossil away in the active position up against whatever the opposing Pokemon is, or if it's safe to put a Ninjask back into the active position and just start up that quick touch cycle of gameplay all over again. We already touched on it, but over in the energy section we got 6 lightning, 6 fire, and then we're going to be running 3 multi-energy. Multi-energy is an amazing special energy card. It's essentially a rainbow energy, but it doesn't ping you for 10. It provides all types of energy, but only one at a time. The only thing that stops multi-energy from doing its thing is if you already have another special energy card attached to that Pokemon. Like I was saying earlier, it's nice to have a multi-energy attached to a Ninjask that's providing grass energy, because then when you use Quick Touch into Rayquaza as your finishing Pokemon, you can actually transfer over 1 multi-energy, and it's going to provide either a fire or a lightning. Nice little combo to pull off late in the game just to get that extra power onto Rayquaza EX. But Shuckle, why not include Shedinja in the build? It is its own form of stall that can completely wall specific decks. The reason is because I'm saving that for another video. More content! If Fossil Stall is a little too gimmicky for your taste, but you still want to stick with the bug type theme, then Dustox is another fun alternative. You hit the opposing Pokemon with a Toxic, you make it more difficult for them to retreat with Mirage Stadium, and the deck kind of just does its thing. Ninjask can also be a fun partner for these 2 Sceptile, making for a deck where you're moving around your Pokemon a lot with Ninjask, but also moving energy around with Sceptile, with Energy Trans, all the while setting up for bigger and bigger versions of Lizard Poison. First of all, 10 out of 10 attack naming, but also you can get so much mileage out of this attack by just attaching 1 energy, using Lizard Poison, attach another energy, use Lizard Poison again with a different effect, attach a 3rd energy, use Lizard Poison again for a 3rd effect. It just keeps going, and it makes for a really fun series of turns that you can reasonably pull off because this Sceptile has 120 HP. Not a top tier deck or anything, but it is something that I wanted to mention here at the end. If I'm missing any fun Ninjask partners that you have tried before, be sure to let me know down there in the comments. Let me know what you're looking forward to most across these EX formats, and maybe leave some suggested decks down there. Be sure to check back for more EX era content as we wiggle on through. Like, comment, subscribe, do all of the fun YouTube stuff that helps me out. I'll see you next video.